It's December 12th, 2016. I'm at the Independence Municipal Court. I'm in the parking lot, getting ready to post my appeal for the decision that was made against me on, I believe, the 1st, regarding the property that I no longer own and no longer owned at the time of the charges. My attorney and I are appealing this for a jury trial. It's 3:30 in the afternoon. I'm about to go inside. I fashioned this phone holder that will fit into my shirt pocket so I can record the whole transaction incognito style. It's going to go in my shirt pocket like so. I can't put it in one-handed and record it, so this is just how it's being recorded.
Can I help you?
Hi, I'm here to place an appeal bond.
What's the last name?
Stark. Joseph.
You have the cash for both.
Say what?
You have the cash for the filing fee and the appeal.
I was told it was $1,000.
Let me go grab it and I'll look. So it's $1,000 for the appeal, and then how much is the filing fee? $61.50. Plus filing fees on each one would be an extra $246. Yeah.
So you're talking about $1,246.
Correct. And we close in 10 minutes.
The filing fees is news to me. I have $1,000 and that's
it. They would have
it.
filled that out for you when you came to the window. It would have been on a slip.
Say what?
They would have filled out the appeal information that day of your court after you came out here.
I didn't come out here. I just left.
Well, then that's your fault. We close, and today's the last day. You might call him. It's out of our hands. That's just how those work with appeals. They're 10 days.
You said 10 minutes?
Yeah, we close at 4.
Oh my God. So I'm not leaving the courthouse. That was absolutely ridiculous. I can't believe this. Literally starting a FundMe page to try and gather the money for the appeal, only to find out that there's $60 filing fees on each charge, making a grand total of $1,249. So I guess my move now is to skip state and shoot a YouTube video documenting this whole event. Hopefully I don't get pulled over between now and Sunday in the city of Independence and get arrested and end up spending Christmas and New Year's in jail in Missouri. That would be absolutely terrible. So I made it to Florida without incident. Some of you may have seen me on a Kansas City Fox 4 news clip from April of 2015 about a man living in a van on his own property in Independence, Missouri. If not, the link is in the description below. Outside of being interviewed by Fox 4, I had nothing to do with that news story taking place. The man opposite me in the video called the news and the city on me for camping out on my own property, which is absolutely absurd being that he could not see my property from his. Furthermore, he was a renter. Despite the news story, full support of most of my neighbors, and that guy being removed from the neighborhood by the city for being a nuisance neighbor, I was still prosecuted by the city. That event was the catalyst for this video. My struggles with the city did not start there. They actually started the fall of 2014 when I was jailed for 3 days for tall grass and open storage on a property that I no longer owned. I assume now you're asking, how can someone be jailed for code violations on a property that they don't own? The simple answer is government is force, legislation applies violence, and the generation of revenue. The long answer is I did a deed in lieu of foreclosure on a property that I owned in 2013, but the mortgage company did not transfer the deed into their name. Then spring, summer of 2014, the grass grew up, a large branch fell from a tree into the yard, and there was debris dumped on the property. So the health department posted code violations on the door of the property. By chance, I was driving by one day out of curiosity of what had become of my property and to see the violations posted to the door. I then went to the health department with documentation from the mortgage company stating that the property was no longer mine or my responsibility. I was told by the health department that they would take care of it, but instead they sent the charges to court without my knowledge of that happening. Sometime after that, I received warrants in the mail. I went to the police station with my documentation stating that the property was no longer mine, but I was arrested and told that I should keep that for court. Due to the petty nature of my charges, I thought that I would be released on my own recognizance. I was wrong. I was shackled, hands and feet, placed on a van with real criminals, then driven 45 minutes away to a holding facility somewhere around Centerville, Missouri. I initially pled innocent to said charges, but I was informed by my cellmates that if I did not plead guilty, I would be kept there until court, which was 45 days away. So being the petty nature of my charges, I did exactly that. As my cellmates so eloquently put it, they will teach you about that innocent shit. Despite pleading guilty on my first day in, I was still somehow bailed out 3 days later by my at the time roommate for $300 without my permission. I learned of this upon my release. Being that I pled guilty, being bailed out should not have been available. This caused a lot of strife between said roommate and I, especially being that she used a bail bondsman and the $300 was non-refundable, plus the jail claiming that I had a court date, but the court claimed that I did not. I spent the better part of a day going between the jail, the courthouse, and the bail's bondsman, trying to sort out the city's clerical error. I spoke to an attorney about suing the city over this, but I was informed that it is extremely hard to sue a city due to them having sovereignty. He told me about 2 separate occasions that he had unsuccessfully represented clients in an attempt to sue a city over a fire department burning down their house while they were at work. This whole event caused my roommate and I to go our separate ways. This is, in fact, when I started living the van life. I moved from a house in Blue Springs that I was living in to a full-size van that I had converted into an RV. I initially started camping out on my property, but due to some neighbors having no idea what was going on, the police were called on me. I dealt with that situation, but I was told by the police that I could not camp there even though it was my property. I started parking lot camping after that, new parking lot every night. It was cool at first, but I was continually woke up by disturbances in the parking lot or people knocking on my van. One morning I woke up to some guy trying to cut off my catalytic converter with a sawzall. That was the last straw. I immediately went back to camping on my property. All was well until the news was called. Immediately following the news story, most of my neighbors came over to my property to meet me, most of which told me they had no idea I was there and that they thought the cars on my property were just parked cars. Several of my neighbors went as far as to make signs in support of me. They placed them in their yards and around the neighborhood. Despite all this, shortly after, I was issued 2 court summons by the city. One from zoning for living in a motorized vehicle on a residential lot, and one from the health department for a rock pile. I'd been bringing in clean fill, which is dirt, rocks, broken concrete, in an effort to stop the erosion problem I had and level out the property so that I could build a tiny house. Around that same time period, I was visited on my property by an engineer from the Public Works Department named Sean Carter. He told me that I could bring in up to 50 yards of clean fill without a permit and that I needed to build a berm for the erosion problem I had. Around that same time period, I started going to the zoning department to ask questions about city code. I also started going to city council meetings in an attempt to stop the city from prosecuting me. What I found out from zoning is that I could not build a tiny house due to new construction having to be at least 900 square feet, which shattered my dreams of building a tiny house and rendered my property useless to me. So upon finding this out, I immediately put my property up for sale and found other living arrangements. I moved off the property in late May, and the sale was finalized July 22nd, 2015. I also found out that around 2009, the City of Independence commissioned a company in Overland Park to write new zoning ordinance for them for low 6 figures. That code that was written in 2009 dictates zoning policy to this day. I went to 3 city council meetings. At the first meeting, once adjourned, I approached my district's representative, Tom Van Camp. I told him my story, and he said that he would have the situation taken care of. He gave me his card and told me to call him later in the week. A few days later, I called his office. I spoke to his receptionist, left a message. I also left a voicemail on his cell phone. I received no response. At the next city council meeting, once adjourned, I approached the mayor, Eileen Weir. She blew me off like I was a peasant. She then directed me to speak to some city worker. I did so, and afterwards, I spoke to Tom Van Camp. I asked him why he didn't return my messages and what did zoning have to say. He claimed he did not receive them, but he did speak to zoning, and they were unwilling to let it go. But he assured me that if I was contrite in court, that there would be no prosecution. Out of disbelief of what he just said, I repeated the word contrite. He took it as if I didn't know the meaning of the word. He responded, basically, get down on your knees and beg. Upon hearing that, I just turned around and left. I thought about this for about 3 days. I then called Tom Van Camp's office again, leaving a message stating that I am not sorry at all. I received no return for that call either. 2 weeks later, I went to another city council meeting and spoke to him again. I asked if he had received my messages. He said no. I then told him that I was not contrite at all, and that if I am prosecuted, then I will not pay any fine out of principle and protest. Therefore, I would have to be jailed and become a tax liability. He said if that does happen, he would take care of me. Out of disbelief of anything he says, I then drafted a petition and took it door to door. I collected 43 signatures from mostly my neighbors. I also went to the Public Works Department and collected documentation regarding the clean fill. I went to court August 12, 2015. Despite having documentation stating that I did not need a permit for the clean fill, and having a petition telling the court to leave me alone, signed by 43 Independence residents, I was still prosecuted on both charges. Judge Gary Helm told me that my petition and documentation did not matter to him. I was fined $358, which isn't a lot of money, but out of principle and protest, I had no interest in paying any of it. I told the court that I had no money due to me not being able to afford to go to jail at that time. They gave me until September to pay or see the judge again. I then contacted Fox 4, only to be told that they had no interest in doing a follow-up on my story. I then contacted all the other TV news stations in the Kansas City area, but none of them were interested in covering my story. I even had friends call said stations in an attempt to push my story. They just flat out did not care. I then drafted a petition, change.org, for the residents of Independence, Missouri. The petition received 30 signatures, some of which were not from Independence residents. The September 23rd court date eventually came. The day before, I was contemplating what might transpire the next day in court. I started looking at the documentation I received in court in August regarding the fines. Previously, I had only skimmed over it due to being in disbelief of what had just happened to me in court, but upon reading it in its entirety, I found that I could be held in contempt. Upon reading that, I immediately contacted my attorney, being that I still could not afford to go to jail at that time. I was told that if I make an appearance of trying to pay, then I would just be given another court date. So the next day, I paid $50 in appeasement before entering the courtroom. There was maybe 40 people in the courtroom. Once seated, the judge said, "Okay, people, today we're going to do things a little bit differently. Being that there are 150 people on this docket, and there are not nearly that many people in this room. So instead of me reading a bunch of names pointlessly, we're going to proceed from the left side of the courtroom, row by row, to the right side of the courtroom. So in other words, you're seated in the order of the line." I was seated dead center, so I was able to hear several cases before mine, most of which were for real crime: shoplifting, assault, child endangerment, DWI, child abandonment. Yet I was there for living in a van on my own property and a rock pile, which is ridiculous on so many levels, but especially being that this city has no shortage of real crime. I was also one of the few people that had made any attempt at making a payment. When my turn came to approach the bench, I was given another pay due date or see the judge again. I recall making one more debtors court appearance before skipping town for Florida and paying 10 more in appeasement, but I don't recall the date. During the whole debtors court fiasco, I was informed of new charges that had been filed against me in September of 2015 on the same property for the same offenses that I had sold in July. Once informed of these charges, I immediately contacted my attorney. Him and I went to court December 9th, 2015, regarding the false charges on my former property. Once seeing my name, the city prosecutor, Mitch Langsford, recused himself because of the petition I had posted online after the August court date. The case was continued to February 2016. My attorney went to court without me while I was in Florida. He had all charges against me thrown out by presenting proof of residency elsewhere and copies of documentation regarding the sale that took place July 22nd, 2015. Upon my return to Missouri, I turned myself in to the Independence Police Station on May 1st for the warrants from the August 2015 trial. Once in police custody, I was informed of 4 new charges that had been filed against me on the exact same property in December of 2015 for nearly the exact same thing. Here's the thing about jail, or at least jail in Independence, Missouri. Once you're in custody and the correctional officers have your possessions, you cannot have them back until you are released. You're just basically stuck in there with nearly no contact to the outside world. On top of that, all the phones work on a collect call type manner. It's an extremely powerless feeling, especially when you have been blindsided by new charges. I was released the night of May 6th. I contacted my attorney Monday, May 9th about the new charges. I do not recall the original court date, but it was continued several times due to recusals and building a defense. December 1st, 2016, my attorney and I showed up in court with copies of the original claim deed and handwritten contract from the guy I sold it to, all of which had been notarized. The problem with the situation is the guy that I sold it to did not record the deed and claims that he lost the original quitclaim deed. So in response to that situation, my attorney had me execute a new quitclaim deed and had me file it with the county myself. He also drafted a contract stating that the sale was complete July 22nd, 2015, and that the buyer had the property in his control since then. He had both the buyer and I sign it. It was notarized as well. Despite all this, I was found guilty on all 4 charges of city code violations and fined $600. The city prosecutor stated to me in court that I had an excellent case for a civil suit, but I have no interest in pursuing anything of that manner, being that this whole ordeal is ridiculous. I was in absolute disbelief of what had just happened as my attorney and I were leaving the courthouse. I was talking about skipping state in a few days and dealing with city when I came back from Florida. Rather than doing that, my attorney suggested that we appeal it for a jury trial. He told me that I would have to put up a $1,000 bond, but upon winning, I would receive all of my money back. I thought this sounded like a great idea, being that a jury of my peers would more than likely throw this out due to it being nonsense. With the help of a GoFundMe type account, I raised the $1,000 in the 10 days, only to find out that there is a $61.50 filing fee for each charge. Who in their right mind would pay $246 in non-refundable fees to fight $600 in fines? Not to mention that I would have to pay my attorney more money to represent me in the jury trial. And if I lost after paying said filing fees, that would turn $600 in fines into $846. I do not understand how it became acceptable to tell people who are not harming anyone how to live. A person's property is their business. If you are horrifically concerned with what your neighbor is doing on their property, you need to live in a neighborhood that has a homeowners association. This property I owned, when I owned it, I did not sign any contracts. I did not make any agreements. I have to admit, when I was younger, I did not understand this. Nor did I understand why, how, or even to the extent which human rights exist. All rights can be traced down to property. A person is born with certain inalienable rights that are given to them by their creator. They are not gifts from government. A person has rights because they own themselves. Property that a person acquires through voluntary transactions becomes as much theirs as their own body. So morally speaking, they cannot be told what to do with it. Any violation of a person's property is a violation of their rights. It is immoral and it is tyranny. The city has absolutely no right to do what they have done to me. I am calling on the City Council of Independence, Missouri, including the mayor,
to remove all tyrannical and immoral laws. If there is no victim, there is no crime. Therefore, there is no need for prosecution. Some of you might say, it's just a fine. That money that I acquired that they are trying to fine me for, I acquire that through voluntary transactions. Being, I go to work for it. I make an agreement with an employer where I sell my time, my body, my labor in trade for monetary compensation. That monetary compensation becomes as much mine as my own body, being that I acquire it through voluntary transactions. If you do not agree with that, you are an immoral person.